Probably the reason I've been asked to speak today is that I've run the gamut of every possible institution in Ireland when it comes to research and commercialisation. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk a little bit about my own journey through academia and entrepreneurship, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about the funding mechanisms we availed of, some of the issues around them as I see it. This is all my view, and you're very welcome to disagree, and I have no doubt you will by the time I end with some view, and some of you will fervently agree with me. But that is to say, things have changed, and they are changing, and we need to be very aware, and I think all the great talks you've had earlier today is really pointing to a very big sea change we're seeing happening, step change in the world. I'll talk a little bit about my role in the AI Council, and the AI Ambassador as well, role of that. So to start with, my own journey started, I'm an engineer. So I started as a software engineer in DIT, Kevin Street. I was an electronic engineer with a specialty or expertise or majoring in software engineering. So that's when, I'm going to sound really old by the end of this talk as well. So I got my degree, and I actually ended up working as a software engineer for a couple of years in something it was actually so basic and so interesting, but it was billing systems. You picked the phone up, because in those days you still picked the phone up. You picked the phone up and you hung it up and you made a call. And what happens in the background so you get a bill at the end of the day is quite remarkable, actually. And it was, God, we're talking about 25 years ago now. But after that, I ended up going back to do a PhD in signal processing and machine learning in the year 2000. So I'd worked for a couple of years in software engineering. It wasn't really for me. It was a little too repetitive for my liking. I wanted to be an inventor. Or I just wanted not to work for a couple of years and take it a little bit easier. Doing a PhD is probably not the route to do that. Bit of a misleading career choice. But the idea I wanted to work on was something very close to humans. I wanted to work, and I ended up working on speech recognition in general. So the area was, actually the title of my thesis was Audiovisual Feature Analysis for Speech Recognition. And what that effectively means is how we augmented the acoustic sounds, the speech, the audio speech with lip reading, and particularly in adverse noisy conditions. It's still relevant today, strangely enough, even though the speech recognition's got so much better. Probably surprisingly and unsurprisingly, a lot of the methods are not that different. The feature extraction methods are actually not that different from 25 years ago. I was actually kind of flummoxed to realize that some parts of the feature analysis haven't changed a huge amount. What has changed is the machine learning aspects of it. Back then we were building on a couple of hours of data, and it would take weeks on a neural net and a cluster in Columbia University, and all these different approaches just to show that it was lousy. The minute there was any noise in the background, it would fall apart. But it didn't mean we didn't work on it, right? We have been moving this field forward for decades, building on the previous research, and we're getting to a point of how it was working. And the step change happened in all that around 2012, particularly around the availability of GPUs on demand and the transfer of data so easily from users around the world to servers to be able to exploit them through machine learning techniques. But my own journey during my PhD led me to started in UCD. During my time in UCD, I spent time in Columbia University, about 2 years there, and also IBM Research in Yorktown Heights. I did part of my role there was actually to avail of their data. They had this amazing data set on audiovisual speech recognition. They would not let you use it outside of IBM Research. They had recognized even back in 2003 the value of data, even though a lot of people still didn't quite understand the value of data. You had to work for them if you wanted to use it. So to complete my PhD, I spent some time there. I graduated 2004 or 5, and I went to work for Bell Labs. And Bell Labs, as some of you will know, set up in Blanchardstown. It was kind of like a satellite office to the Summit, New Jersey team. It was quite cool. It was actually really innovative. We worked with CTVR here in Ireland. There was any number of problems with that. The collaboration there between industry and academia, it actually unveiled a lot of issues around that, where people just wanted to get the funding and go off and do the research, and the commercialization was kind of annoying almost. And we worked on it though, and we did, and we formed a board, and we made sure that there was more collaboration between the institutions. And we were all learning as well at the time. We used to avail of the IDA tax credits to the tune of tens of millions. It was very big incentives for Bell Labs to be situated here in Ireland and do the research and buy the equipment. And very good for my own development. So I had worked as a PhD researcher, and then some postgrad work, and then into Bell Labs. And what was interesting about that was that when I joined Bell Labs, we were Lucent Technology Bell Labs, so Lucent Bell Labs. And in those days, it was blue skies research. And if you said to a Bell Labs researcher anything about applied research, it was like a dirty word, like, get that away from me. We are Bell Labs, we'll do whatever we want. And then we got acquired by IKTA, merged with Alcatel. A merger of unequals, I think, at the time, unfortunately. So Alcatel's culture dominated, and Alcatel's culture was research, but you had to have a business case for doing so. So then it got to begin. There was ructions. A lot of people were very put out to suddenly have to do something that wasn't just blue skies, but they had to actually get the okay from a business unit that what they were working on would have some value to the business, to the own business. It makes sense, right? When you're thinking about it, it's still an institution, but it did, cause an awful lot of issues for the institution Bell Labs. But there was a gradual move towards that. We were still allowed to do the blue skies research, but had to be within a context or a boundary, for at the very least. Myself, I had been working on speech recognition. I ended up working on monitoring of the end of life of fans, and these be up in data centers or in, in your servers or in your base stations, all these very critical places that if a fan breakdown, the whole thing was shut down. So we were using it to predict end of life based on acoustic sounds that the human ear couldn't hear. Really interesting work. I did a lot of work around e-health and elder care remote monitoring. But again, as the company started to struggle, the focus of the research areas pulled right back into the core areas of Alcatel-Lucent, which were the network, right? So they began to start getting less enthusiastic about these very tangential areas that I was very passionate about. But all the while, I was there in Bell Labs for 7 years, and I actually didn't realize it almost until I'd left that we were pitching, or I was very much pitching. We used to have these competitions if you wanted to win resources, so you could actually build a team to work on something. You could actually convince people to come work on your team. You would get financial rewards to buy equipment or data or whatever you needed, but you had to pitch the business case. You had to come up with and validate it and pitch it to management. And so all the while I was doing this research and coming up with these ideas that ultimately probably weren't around the network, that the core of their technology and actually commercial value was, I was learning, and I was learning how to pitch, and I was learning how to do the commercial side of research. So there was a lot of changes. I ultimately decided to leave Bell Labs because I found I was not in control of my own destiny in terms of research, and for somebody like me, that will never sit. Somebody making a decision 2 levels above you to can something they barely know anything about was hugely frustrating. So I decided, right, that's it, I'm done. Entrepreneurship for me. To be in control of my own destiny. And it was a really hard decision to do. It was a great job, very interesting, but it taught me very well. And when I actually eventually did leave, it served me. So I had the academic background and I had the commercial side to it as well. So I had a 3-year-old at the time, and actually a small child and a baby as well. And I was watching my nearly 4-year-old interact with apps, right? So it was about 2012, 2013. The App Store was huge. We were making App Store millionaires out of people doing. Discoverability was horrendous, but people were making money. And what I was doing is downloading apps that were education. So I didn't want my daughter on the iPad. I wanted, at the very least, if I was going to give her an iPad, it would be educational, and she would be learning something. I wouldn't feel so guilty, right? So it was a reading app, a phonics reading app. And I was given to her and I was observing her in her interacting with it. And it kept sending me emails about how amazing she was doing, upping the levels. And I was going, my child's a genius. And then I actually kind of went, oh, what's that sound there? Because she'd completed many levels at this point. She'd be like, and I was going, what's that? And she still didn't know. So I was watching her play it, and every time it came to quiz her, it would show, like, it would say the sound, ah. And then it would give her two options, the one with the correct one and another. And she'd just go, and then if it was wrong, the little character would just run around again and do it again. And she'd just go, clearly that one didn't work, that one. So she gamed the system, and to me, I was there going, okay, I'm a speech recognition engineer. Surely we should be assessing the child using speech. But also being a parent, listening to a 3-year-old speak was like, well, I've worked in this area for years. It's a challenging area anyway, with background noise and different accents and humans, male, female, different pitch of voices. And then I'm listening to a 3-year-old can barely articulate, but I can understand them because I'm a parent, right? So I understand, I've learned to. So I began to realize that the speech recognition that as it existed was never going to work for a young child. It was just, their pitch was different. I actually had done some work where I was able to separate where the information was in the signal, and it was in a different place. So if you trained a machine learning algorithm on adults, it'd be looking in a different part of the spectrum than it would be for a child. So of course it wasn't going to work. But I had also worked for big tech. I'd worked in that time in IBM and in Bell Labs, and I understood how they think about projects. And I understood it was going to take a lot of investment to get this done in terms of data, but also in terms of the machine learning, the expertise where we were. So I recognized globally this is a big opportunity, particularly for a startup. But for Google and Apple and all those guys, they want the whole world. And when they build models, they don't separate models out for different cohorts. They just build it for everybody and then hope it works, and then just chuck data and train that and hope it works. And I could see and hear, oh, that's not going to work. They're going to, they are also using what we now know, and I can talk about language models now and people know what I'm talking about, but years ago, nobody knew what I was talking about. We predict the next word, but if you're trying to teach a child to read, the cat sat on the mat, you're not trying to predict what they said, you're trying to verify that they said what was on the page. Different problem. More like biometrics than it would be speech recognition. Very interesting for those in the area. So I recognized why these guys weren't going to be able to do what we could do, and I recognized an opportunity. But the big problem was data. So what I did first, when I started spending my own money, I just started hiring contractors. We built an app. And we built an app. And I didn't talk about this for years, actually. I would never talk about it publicly because it was what the secret sauce a lot behind it. We built a really good app that would get kids to repeat sounds and articulate correctly. And then we started collecting the data, all within COPPA, because COPPA, like GDPR, are much more strict even than GDPR, much more prescriptive about how you collect the data. We were able to do that and start collecting the data over time. And then it was the data set. There's no point even starting without a good data set. And it couldn't be a data set you collected in a nice clean room in a university. It had to be something that was collected in the real world, in real living rooms and real kitchens, because kids don't go off into a room on their iPad and quietly work away. They're in the middle of the kitchen. So if it wasn't going to work there was no point doing it, right? So that was huge. So we had to build an app, infrastructure to get consent around data. We had to be able to delete the data at any time when requested. So this wasn't just a simple app. I had to record, had to store it in the cloud, had to label it in order to be able to delete the data when requested. It was a lot of investment. But the idea was that as a parent, I recognized data is an issue, data privacy is an issue. People are going to be more sensitive about kids' data in terms of education, schools, whatever. And we need to get this right from the get-go. And honestly, 10, 12 years later, that was one of the best decisions we ever made. We recognized what was right, and we just did it because we recognized that was also a commercial advantage too. But around about that time, I recognized I need to hire a bunch of people. And to be honest, spending your own money the whole time gets really tiring. But imagine it was 2013, 2014, right? 2015, around that time. And I was trying to convince people, one, that speech recognition was going to be commercially successful. Two, kids' speech recognition was important to do it, and 3 that would ever work, right? So this has been way ahead of the curve, and trying to pitch that to investors. And the problem is people don't know what they don't know. This was also, remember, pre-Alexa. That wasn't even in people's kitchens at the time, right? So Siri was on phones and it was lousy and nobody worked, right? There was a great video of Ozzy Osbourne in his BMW screaming at the speech recognition system that they'd, inadvisably had installed in it, and it was dead. The whole field was dead. But to try and convince people that AI is an evolutionary technology, it evolves, it continuously improves with data, with algorithms, was extremely hard to do. I had people kind of look at me going, I think voice has peaked, to be honest. AI, is it really going to get the traction? And honestly, most of those people were not experts. They weren't even technologists. And apologies to any VCs in the room. They weren't expertise, and they more often than not did not go seek an expert to give them advice. And to be honest, even if they did, they might still not have been convinced. It was too risky for them. Google will do it. Without recognizing that as a track record as well, to be able to say, no, I know I have good reasons why they won't do this, and they won't do it in the time frame that they will be able to catch up with us to do. It was an extremely hard sell. So in comes the Comms Fund. And I have to thank Paddy O'Boiler, he'll kill me for not putting me onto the Comms Fund. But the Comms Fund was amazing. It was amazing in concept. I have a lot of criticism of the Comms Fund, but in principle, it was amazing. And I really think Ireland should be leaning into this a lot more, right? But there's a lot of problems that need to be fixed before we can do that. It works because it works for pre-seed funding for deep tech. And there's very little that mirrors that across the world, right? I was able to avail of that after spending my own money, kind of little done with it. I was the entrepreneur that could do the commercialization and scaling, and I also had the technical background. So a little bit different, but that's kind of almost irrelevant. I was able to spin in, draw down the funding and spin out. There were challenges, a lot of challenges. It was extremely difficult to do it. There was a lot of roadblocks in the way. There was a lot of terms I wasn't happy with. I had to fight really hard for it. Actually, delighted to see Dermot O'Brien. He was definitely somebody who convinced me to come into Trinity to do this. So to use that to go in and incubate the idea within Trinity and move it to the point where we could then spin out and for it to be commercializable. I did no technology other than concept generation, ideas. All the ideas I brought, that's very much the researcher in me, how we're going to do this, and then I hired people to do the work. I focused on the commercialization from the minute the Comms Fund started. I was out talking to investors, I was writing the business plan. I was traveling around the world. Actually, one guy actually who eventually did make an acquisition offer to us, I met him in 2015. And ultimately, I think they ended up becoming a customer like 7 years later. Long sales cycles, accepting of AI technology, but thinking about it going forward. That time was really, really important to be able to get the funding. So when we spun out, that is not the time to start raising funding. You've got a massive gap there. It can take up to a year to get funded, depending on what the climate's like out there. And at the moment, it's not great. There's not a lot of liquidity out there. And it's always been bad. And deep tech puts the fear of God into a lot of investors because they don't understand it. Europe as a whole is risk adverse, particularly compared to the US. So there's so many issues that make it very hard. I ended up looking at VC. Being honest, the terms were not comparable to what you see in any other country. So I decided to go a different road and go with angels. Surprisingly raised, surprised or not surprising, 1.2 million. That included Enterprise Ireland as a seed round. But that was a lot of work to get there, a lot of work. And honestly, a fairly significant track record behind me. Data proved to be able to do that as well, right? But it was almost like way too hard to do what I had to do. And I could see other people possibly doing that much easier in other countries. And that was really frustrating. We pulled it off. So the second thing, the minute that closed, because of how hard it was and because I was recognizing the difficulty in this, I I immediately applied for what was SMEI Phase 2, the EU Horizon 2020. I think it's called something else now. Okay. It's changed its name now. EIC, I think, right? Yeah. Right, so the round I got accepted on was 1.5% success rate. I got on the third round. The first time, I probably spent 7 days a week for about a month or two. I got a consultant that helped me work in it. We're still friends today and sharing thing. Like, it was kind of like we went into the trenches on it. But I had to spend so much time writing that. And then I didn't get accepted. And I had to spend so many times changing it, didn't get accepted, got on the third one. That got me 1.5 million, if I remember correctly, of a grant. And what I was able to do is then go back to all the investors going, I've just got a grant of 1.5 million. You can invest alongside this. We managed to get around together for about 3 million. Because they were chucking money in at that point. I was going 1.5, your old investment's not diluted. Every single one of them came in again, right? So we keep going. We're building the company at this point. We'd spun out of Trinity. We were moved from 5 to 7 to 9 people. And again, I recognize we're going to need, after about a year and a half, so every year and a half, we were doing a lot of traction. But the EU funding, I think most of you guys are going to be familiar with about the TRL levels you got to go to. So it had to be research, right? We couldn't just be using it for sales and marketing. So it kind of gave us a mandate to go deep. And what we did was we altered, amended, built out infrastructure to allow us to go into multiple languages. Actually, I was just talking to the Soapbox guys today, and they were saying the work they're doing now on languages, the work we did based on the EU thing has allowed them to do it so quickly. They just, every time they want to add language, they can just flip it really, really quickly now because of the work we did with the EU. But it also, it created a problem in that people are going, but you need to have more commercial traction. Go, no, we got the EU funding. We had a mandate around going deep on it. We invested in equity. It worked for every kid. We worked on obviously data privacy was there, and we worked on the language, the scalability of this as a product. All of those things hugely important. And then, because I'm not going to stop there, we went for DTIF, right? And we got DTIF funding. We got 2.5 million. And we, again, paired that together with, that was kind of a match funding thing with our investors again. So they came in again on that. And ultimately, after many rounds and all, we ended up getting a reputation, and I would attribute a big amount of this to bringing on Niamh Bushnell, who was the startup commissioner, also Tech Ireland. She came on board, and from 2019 worked with us full time to get under the skin of how we communicated the deep tech, because this is such a big issue for companies. People go, oh, that's something I'll pay a PR company. We did the PR company once, maybe twice, and I would never do it again because we paid huge amounts of money and you got one article and the rest was rubbish. And it was a lot of money. So we got instead decided to go deep on something. We got thought leadership pieces. We got, the fact that I was mentioned in Forbes was down to the fact that people knew my name because I was speaking in US conferences. I was I was writing for TechCrunch. I wrote for the Next Web. I was getting stuff out there. I wouldn't have the time to do all that myself without somebody who's helping to communicate what we were. By the time we were sold in 2023, every single US EdTech, and I'm talking about Scholastic, McGraw-Hill, Curriculum Associates, HMH, all of them were either customers or were about to become customers of ours, right? We were known as the standard in the US. Not really here because, to be honest, as any kid actually got access to an iPad in primary school here more than a few hours a week. So, Ireland's not at the races, most of Europe isn't. The US is completely different. It's a multi-billion dollar industry over there. But we became known as the standard because we focused on the equity, the data privacy. It worked, the quality was really, really high. We raised a standard in the field. So anybody who was trying to compete with us had to compete at that level. So we were sold. It's a great legacy for us. The company's still going. They're investing more in Ireland as the AI labs here. So all that has been quite a long 10 years by the time we sold. It's been 12 now, nearly, to get to where we are. It's always a 10-year journey. I think people who think it'll be 3 to 5, and it's like rarely, very, and it might be a quick flip at it if it is, but generally speaking, you have to be in it for the long haul. I had a lot of learnings and from abroad. I had a lot of friends who were entrepreneurs, started companies. I knew what to fight for, and I didn't really relent on most things. I knew what was right in terms of growing a company, in terms of investors, equity stakes, board control, all those things I was very aware of, and I fought very hard for them because I knew what I had was valuable. Unfortunately, I think a lot of people are a little bit more inexperienced in that. So a couple of things about the actual funding scene and talk a little bit about Comms Fund. I thought it might be useful, and you can feel free to disagree with me on this. As an entrepreneur, right? So if we look at comms funds and researchers are doing some really cool IP that could be commercializable, we all know the amount of IP can just sit on the shelf, and it will create no value because nobody will license it, nobody spins it out. If they do spin it out, the company dies, right? What's really, really important, because in a pitch, if any of you have ever pitched, most investors will listen to you talk about your product and they'll go, yeah, move on. Traction, go-to-market business model, how are you going to do it? Prove to me that you know what you're doing. They actually get quite impatient, and the advice I give most startups and founders when they're pitching is, stop going on about your product. Talk about your product for 3 slides. They'll get it. They'll look at that later. If they don't believe you know how to sell this and get that market recognition that Soapbox got, right? We couldn't have done most of that business if we didn't have that. But most people, and particularly in academia, because, we spent years building it. I learned eventually to shut up about it. I'd have a quarter or a third of my slides on how amazing we were, and then get down to the brass tacks. But what people really wanted to hear is how you're going to commercialize it. Because there is any number of amazing companies and founders and technologies and out there that make nothing. So without that commercial aspect, you're very lucky if you're going. And a lot of people truly believe that if the technology is amazing, the market will find you. No, it won't. And it's getting worse, right? I think someone said there was 8,200 companies recently funded in AI, right? So it's back to, I have this view in my head of the App Store 2012 when it was impossible to find anything. We're kind of at that level. It doesn't matter how good the technology is. So that is to say that the commercial aspect's really, really important. It's as important, unfortunately, as the technology. And I feel like when we're talking about in academia, that's not valued as much, right? It's the academic is lauded, and then this is something we have to get done to get it out, and somebody will do it. Doesn't matter who. It doesn't work like that. And if you're frustrated by the lack of funding in your spin-outs, it's because the investors know that too. So what's really important, what I see working so well, is the comms fund with a commercial head. And that can be your academic if they're willing to learn, but they have to be willing to learn and do the training and put the time in, and they can't be researching or lecturing at the same time. It's a full-time job, right? Especially during the comms fund. It's time that everybody gets to know you. By the time you get out and start raising funding, people understand, they believe that you can commercialize this product. So let's say I would be considered a serial entrepreneur if I was to step back into the game now, right? If I was to look at the terms of a commercialization fund as a commercial, serious entrepreneur who knows how to build companies, hard pass the way it stands right now, right? It isn't incentivizing for me to step into a commercial. So I get to work for 2 years and I might get to spin it out, and then we'll discuss those terms later. And I'm going, no, I have way too many opportunities and many other ways of getting funding. I can just come up with another idea. I can partner with somebody else. No, right? That's me. I have options, right? I'm now an investor. I'm on the other side of the table. Now let me look at a comms fund, and am I going to invest? Is there any ambiguity in that contract about future earnings, IP assignment, anything in there that we don't know who owns the IP? How can the company that I'm now going to take a massive risk on and invest? If there's any ambiguity, hard pass. I'm not investing in it, just not. I am an angel investor on a platform in the UK. I'm here on 2 of them in the UK. I get to see deals like Perplexity.ai. I get to see hundreds, actually so much so I just step back from one, and they're so high quality. The pipeline for an investor is massive. I don't need to do this particular one that's coming out of the university. I need to be incentivized to do it. So if you give me ambiguity or risk, I'm out. It's just, I mean, and people go, but it's so good. I know, I'm sure it is, but there's 1,000 other companies that's also good. So why would I do that? And I think that's to say is, I think we have something really special in the Comms Fund. I love the idea of pre-seed for deep tech because investors don't understand it. And we've developed something here in Ireland that I think is really, really important. And I think it's something that we could do. The confusion and the ambiguity and the it's different and we'll decide it later. I mean, royalties, if you're already taking equity, no investor takes royalties and equity, they take equity. I understand there's researchers in the universities that should be incentivized, a little bit of equity. I don't know, there's an idea, but like, I'm sure you guys could come up with better ideas than that. There's so many ways to sit down and brainstorm. Every university should be doing the same. It should be laminated. If I'm an entrepreneur and I'm thinking of partnering and coming in on a Comms Fund, I should know what to expect. I know there's state aid rules, blah, blah, blah. If it was laminated and we knew what the terms were on the spin out, then it probably wouldn't matter so much, right? Right now, I'm kind of going to spend 2 years of my life doing something. I don't know what's going to happen on the other end. No. So, look, you can disagree with me all right. There's probably different areas that are not tech. Maybe I'm just looking at the AI tech perspective. But I'm telling you what it's like as an entrepreneur, and I'm telling you what it's like as an investor now. So, kind of segue into a little bit of the AI ambassador role. The AI ambassador role was helped a couple of years now to help demystify AI. It was becoming such a big thing the minute ChatGPT kicked off and the Pope and the puffer coat never became interested. We thought the best approach was to form a council of experts. Alan Smeaton is on the council with me, along with another 13 people. And the expertise across academia, industry, legal, ethics, SMEs and startups as well. And together we wrote recommendations back in January, February. Some of it's around this about how we need to get better at funding AI startups. For one, startups need to be AI first. I think you probably heard a lot about that today. It doesn't matter if you're making a medical device that's nothing to do with AI or dog food, your company should be AI. It should be just how you do business, as opposed to a department or a product or a service. It's how you do business. It's the new operating system. So with that in mind, we're advocating better, faster ways to innovate, get startups up and running, let them try, let them fail if they need to. It's okay. So the downside protection is not what we need to worry about. We need to worry about winning this, or sorry, I won't even say winning, being in the race, right? We need to make faster decisions. I would advocate for a panel of experts across biotech, medtech, AI, all different aspects that whenever somebody applies for a grant or investment, there's a panel of experts that can be drawn in to give their expertise. So a VC, an angel, a grant funder can avail of quickly expert decisions. Innovate UK was a great example of how they do it. I know there seems to be changes happening, but the process, it was smaller amounts, often 300 to 500K, sometimes $1 million. And I know it was different for a lot of them. The ones I was looking at, you get a decision in a couple of months. It wasn't as laborious. It wasn't years. Startups don't operate in year cycles. We need to, fail quickly if you're going to fail and move on, but we need to be allowing companies to try, get out there, support them. I think we're a small enough country that we can wrap our heads around how important this is for us, because we can't rely on FDI. We have to be investing in our own Indigenous companies. We have a mechanism in the Comms Fund. There are also other mechanisms like the IP, some of those partnerships around postdocs and stuff like that. Again, as a startup, we looked at doing, and I can't remember, I'm going to lose the name of one of them, about getting a postdoc from a university, and we invest, and then State Vest, and we get some IP issues, and it just got messy, and we just hired the postdoc ourselves. Done, easy, right? Why not? We have the expertise, and to be honest, it's just going that way. The problem, I think, is as well that we're looking, I think Ronan or Paddy was saying earlier that Google's going to be hiring 1,000 engineers. academia is competing against this. Startups are competing against this. A lot of people don't want to work for big tech, right? They just don't. They'd find this work more interesting. We need to make it easier for them and more attractive to stay in our indigenous companies and our universities. And I think there's stuff we could do, but I think we have to let go of the way we used to do things and look at the future. It's changing. And honestly, I do worry about the revenue streams for universities if we don't change. Because I think the innovation will happen more and more outside the university, and there's less and less reasons for the universities to get revenue and equity payouts and all those things. Simplifying, streamlining, making it easier, make this one thing we have here in Ireland that's different to others when it comes to deep tech, just more attractive for the entrepreneur and the investor. And I think, honestly, we could absolutely scale this. And it could be something we do different to other countries, because people keep asking, what is it that Ireland could do different? And honestly, I really, really feel strongly that we're a small enough country to wrap our heads around it. We're a very university academic-based system that we get the value of it, but I just don't think it's been exploited. And that's just my perspective. There's a lot more in the AI Council recommendations. We're talking about and Alan's the best person to speak about it, but AI literacy and education. We're talking about an AI observatory to monitor the effects today, much like we do inflation, of AI on tasks in the workplace, so we can better see quickly when those changes are happening, for better or worse, whichever side of this you want to be on, but we can see it happening. Right now we're operating blind about how it's going to be affecting skills and work. So there's many other recommendations in there that we published, and there's other papers, more in-depth papers on the back of that. We also advise different departments when they're coming up with their own policies and recommendations as well. So it's a really interesting role, and I think I'll stop there and let IB ask any questions. So thanks.